Welcome to part 3 of the workshop Systematic Literature Retrieval in PubMed, where we will start discussing how to find search terms. If you start finding search terms, it's important that you start finding mesh terms. Mesh terms are the keywords that are assigned by people from PubMed to these articles that are entered into PubMed. They choose the keywords from a long list, a long database of standardized keywords, and they assign the keywords that they think are most relevant to the topic of the article. If you go to the homepage of PubMed, of course you can just type in broccoli cancer prevention and hit search. This will probably generate some relevant references, but this is not the most advanced way of doing a search. The best way to create a search is to go to the homepage of PubMed and to start a search in the mesh database. In the right column, you see a link to the mesh database. If you selected the mesh database, you can search for mesh terms. You do this one element at a time. Let's consider the element of brassica. You type brassica in the search box and you hit search or press enter. You will see that there are several mesh terms with the term brassica. The first one appears to be the most relevant. If you click it, you see there is a mesh term brassica. That is the first thing that you will write down in a Word document. You will copy the term brassica into a Word document and paste it here and add mesh between square brackets behind the term to indicate that this is a mesh term. On this page you can see several other things. A description of what brassica means to PubMed, a long set of subheadings which we advise you to ignore. We will explain later during the workshops how you can use these subheadings. Important here is a list of entry terms. Entry terms can be considered synonyms for the term that we have searched. One of the synonyms that we see here is broccoli. Broccoli is very relevant to our search. We will add broccoli to our Word document. The other synonyms are irrelevant to our search. We are not interested in articles just about Brussels sprout, just about kale, just about cauliflower. We don't add those to our search, only the ones that are relevant. Entry terms work in three ways. An article that contains an entry term will, if it's been indexed with a mesh term, probably most of the time have the mesh term for which that corresponds to that entry term. Another way that these entry terms are used is that if you search PubMed for an entry term, automatically PubMed also searches for these mesh terms. The third way is a more an archaic way, which we will describe later. It is, however, necessary to include entry terms in your search. If you were to construct a search with only mesh terms, you would miss the most recent articles because it takes about half a year before mesh terms are added to your article. Therefore, we recommend to include the entry terms in your search, the entry terms that are relevant. We now do the same for our second element, the element of cancer. If we search the mesh database for cancer, you will find a mesh term that is relevant. The mesh term is called neoplasms. For the element of cancer, we take the mesh term neoplasms and write it down in our Word document. Also, the mesh term neoplasms contains entry terms. Some of them are quite alike. Neoplasia, neoplasias, neoplasm. You can search all of these terms by searching for neoplasm with an asterisk. Likewise, you can search tumor with an asterisk, cancer with an asterisk, and malignant with an asterisk to find malignancy, malignant. You will also notify that there are terms consisting of a phrase, malignant neoplasms. Do we have to search for the phrase malignant neoplasms? Considering that we already searched for neoplasm and we already searched for malignant, we don't have to search for the phrase malignant neoplasm. You will also see that there are inverted phrases, neoplasm, malignant. This is the third way entry terms are used. In the old days, before databases emerged, the mesh term consisted of printed volumes. One of the printed volumes was a book about 5 centimeters thick, and it contained all the entry terms in alphabetical order. They wanted to find malignant neoplasm not only under the M for malignant, but also under the N for neoplasm. That's where it said neoplasm, malignant, use neoplasm. However, nobody will use in their title abstract the phrase neoplasm, malignant. Therefore, anything that has a comma in it, any entry terms can be ignored. The other terms should be taken into account. To summarize, from the mesh database, from the mesh interface, you will use the mesh term itself, and we recommend that you copy the exact phrasing and add mesh between square brackets behind it. And you will use the entry terms. The entry terms will be used as words for searching in title or abstract. You don't have to add anything behind that yet. This will be done later in the process. A few things to consider when adding entry terms. Use only the terms that are relevant for your question. You are not obliged to add all entry terms. In our case, cauliflower was irrelevant. Also, any inversion can be skipped. Any entry term that has an inversion can be skipped, can be ignored. If the mesh term has an inversion, if the mesh term has a comma in it, you need to document exactly the mesh term with the comma. We advise to truncate as much as possible the entry terms. Mesh terms can, however, never be truncated. Never truncate mesh terms, only truncate the entry terms, and you can only truncate at the end of the word or the phrase and not in the middle. What we recommend if you want to search for a phrase is that you use a hyphen. If in our case Brussels sprout had been relevant, we recommend that you use a hyphen instead of a phrase, instead of a space. I want to invite you to do an exercise on this. The exercise is to gather relevant mesh terms and entry terms for the research question. Is exercise therapy an effective treatment for hip osteoarthritis? There's 2 elements in this set: hip osteoarthritis and exercise therapy. Please try and create a list of terms, a list of mesh terms, a list of entry terms that you would want to use for each of these elements.